December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Complete. Pitch. Blackness. A German patrol of 37 seasoned veterans enters the tree line. They are the hunters. They know this terrain. They have the weapons, the numbers, and the cover of a moonless winter night. By dawn, not a single one of them would leave those woods alive. And here is the terrifying part. Nobody heard a gunshot. The Germans found the bodies the next morning, slumped in the snow, frozen in positions of confusion. No artillery craters, no machine gun nests. Just 37 men extinguished by something they never saw coming. Intelligence reports from the Wehrmacht began to circulate a name. A whisper among the terrified infantry. Der Nachtgeist. The Night Ghost. They assumed the Americans had developed a new secret weapon. A terrifying technological leap that allowed them to see through the dark. They were half right. It was a secret weapon. But it didn't come from a laboratory in Los Alamos. It didn't cost the U.S. government millions of dollars. And it certainly wasn't authorized by the Pentagon. The Night Ghost was Corporal James Jimmy Henderson, a 24-year-old farm boy from Montana who grew up hunting elk in the twilight, a man who realized that Army-issued equipment was going to get his friends killed, so he built something else. Using $12 worth of radio parts scavenged from a crashed plane, a roll of electrical tape, and the kind of mechanical intuition you only learn fixing tractors in a blizzard, he created a night vision system that was technically forbidden and completely impossible to ignore. He achieved a 93% accuracy rate in zero-light conditions. This is the story of how one farm boy outsmarted the entire German military engineering corps. This is how he changed sniper doctrine forever, and it starts in the coldest winter Europe had seen in 50 years. To understand why Jimmy Henderson did what he did, you first have to understand the nightmare of the Bulge. History books talk about the cold. They talk about the snow. But they rarely talk about the blindness. In December 1944, the Ardennes offensive wasn't just a battle for territory. It was a battle against the elements. The days were short, gray, and fog-choked. The nights were an eternity. For the average American, WWII. Nightfall meant paralysis. You dug your foxhole, you checked your rifle, and then you stared into a void so absolute it felt like it had weight. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. You couldn't see the tree line 50 yards away. And you certainly couldn't see the white-clad German stormtroopers creeping through the snow until they were close enough to slit your throat. The United States Army, the most mechanized, technologically advanced fighting force in human history, had a fatal flaw. It was a giant. But when the sun went down, that giant was blind. Enter Corporal James Henderson. Jimmy wasn't a soldier by trade. He wasn't a killer by nature. He was a fixer. Back in Montana, before the war, the Henderson family farm was held together by baling wire and stubbornness. If a tractor broke down in the middle of harvest, you didn't order parts. You didn't wait for a mechanic. You walked into the barn. You found a piece of scrap metal that looked roughly like the piece you needed, and you made it work. Jimmy had a gift. He could look at a pile of junk, a broken radio, a cracked lens, a rusted pipe, and see a solution. But more importantly, Jimmy knew the dark. On the farm, predators didn't wait for sunlight. Coyotes came for the calves at 2 a.m. Wolves tracked the herd in the gloom. Jimmy learned early that darkness isn't empty. It's full of information, if you know how to look. He learned to shoot between heartbeats. He learned to track silhouettes against the slightly lighter shade of the sky. He developed what his father called cat eyes. But the Ardennes was different. This wasn't hunting coyotes. This was mechanized slaughter, and the Army's solution for night combat was, frankly, a disaster. It was called the T-120 sniper scope. On paper, it was a marvel. An active infrared system mounted on an M3 carbine. It used a massive infrared spotlight to illuminate the target with invisible light, and a special scope to convert that infrared light into a visible green image. It sounds futuristic. It sounds perfect. In reality, it was a death sentence. The battery pack was the size of a rucksack and weighed as much as a mortar shell. The wires were fragile and prone to snapping in the freezing cold. The spotlight was heavy, awkward, and had a range of maybe 70 yards on a good night. But the biggest problem was the physics. Active infrared works like a flashlight. You are shining a beam of light out into the dark. Just because the human eye can't see it, doesn't mean it's invisible. The Germans had their own infrared detectors. When an American soldier turned on his T-120 sniper scope, he wasn't just seeing the enemy. He was lighting himself up like a Christmas tree to anyone with a detector. He was holding a giant neon sign that said, "I am right here." Jimmy Henderson took one look at the T-120 during a briefing and shook his head. "That thing," he whispered to his spotter, "is gonna get us killed." He didn't know how right he was. December 18th. 2 days into the German offensive, Henderson's platoon was dug in along a ridge overlooking a crucial logging road. Their job was simple: watch the road. If the Germans try to move tanks through, call it in. The sun set at 4:30 p.m. By 5 p.m., the world was gone. The temperature dropped to 10 below zero. The fog rolled in, thick and suffocating. It dampened sound. It distorted distance. Henderson sat in his foxhole, his eyes straining against the blackness. He had his M1 Garand, a standard-issue 4-power scope, and a sinking feeling in his gut. Beside him was Private Miller, a kid from Brooklyn who had been issued one of the rare T-120 sniper scopes. "I can't see anything, Jimmy," Miller whispered, his teeth chattering. "The battery's dying in the cold, and the lens is fogging up." "Keep it off," Henderson warned. "Don't turn that light on unless you have a target." But fear makes men do stupid things. At 0200 hours, a twig snapped. It wasn't a loud noise, just the crack of frozen wood under a heavy boot. Miller panicked. He flipped the switch on his battery pack. The massive infrared spotlight on top of his carbine hummed to life. He swept the tree line, looking for the source of the noise. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, a single shot rang out from the darkness. It was a German sniper. Miller didn't even hear the round that killed him. The German sniper hadn't seen Miller. He had seen the massive bloom of infrared light from Miller's scope. He simply aimed for the source of the light. Chaos erupted. The German patrol, realizing they had been spotted, opened up. Not with rifles, but with MG-42 machine guns. They were firing blind, spraying the ridgeline. Henderson pressed himself into the frozen mud. Tracers zipped overhead like angry hornets. He could hear his squad mates screaming. He could hear the distinct ripcloth sound of the German machine guns, but he couldn't see a damn thing. He raised his rifle, trying to find a muzzle flash, a shadow, anything. But the Germans were disciplined. They were using flash hiders. They were moving between bursts. Henderson was helpless. He was the best shot in the regiment. He could hit a coin at 300 yards in daylight, but right now, he was useless. The firefight lasted 10 minutes. When the sun finally rose, the devastation was absolute. 7 men dead, including Miller. The T-120 sniper scope lay in the mud next to Miller's body, shattered by the bullet that had killed him. The battery acid was leaking into the snow, turning it a sickly yellow. Henderson stared at that broken piece of high-tech garbage. He looked at Miller's frozen face, and something inside the farm boy from Montana broke. Or maybe it fixed itself. Rage is a powerful motivator. But cold, calculated anger, that is the mother of invention. Henderson picked up the shattered remains of the sniper scope. He looked at the heavy glass lens. He looked at the wiring. "Never again," he said. He didn't report to the mess tent that morning. He didn't sleep. Instead, he walked 4 miles through the snow to the edge of the battalion perimeter. There was a rumor that a P-51 Mustang fighter plane had crashed in the woods a week earlier. The pilot had bailed out, but the plane was a wreck. The Army engineers had stripped the guns and the classified code books, but they had left the carcass of the plane to rot. Henderson found it half buried in a snowdrift. The fuselage was twisted aluminum. The wings were sheared off. But the cockpit was a gold mine. He wasn't looking for weapons. He wasn't looking for ammo. He pulled a pair of wire cutters from his belt. He climbed into the shattered cockpit, cutting his hand on the jagged metal. He didn't feel it. He began to rip out the instrument panel. He needed specific parts. Parts that had no business being on a rifle. He needed the voltage regulator. He needed the vacuum tubes from the radio transmitter. He needed the phosphor screen from the radar display. A military police officer on patrol spotted him. "Hey!" the MP shouted, wading through the snow. "Get away from that wreck, soldier. That's government property." Henderson didn't even look up. He just kept cutting wires. "I'm commandeering this," Henderson said, his voice flat. "You're what?" The MP put a hand on his holster. "You're stealing avionics? For what?" Henderson finally turned. His eyes were bloodshot. His face was smeared with grease and soot. He looked like a madman. "I'm going to build some eyes," he said. The MP hesitated. He saw the look in Henderson's face. It was the look of a man who had seen too much and didn't care about a court-martial anymore. "Just don't blow yourself up," the MP muttered, and walked away. Henderson walked back to his foxhole with an armful of electronic scrap. He had a plan. It was technically impossible. According to the laws of physics as understood by the U.S. Army Ordnance Department, what Henderson wanted to do shouldn't work. The Army believed you needed an active light source, a flashlight, to see in the dark. Henderson disagreed. He believed there was always light. Even in the pitch black of the Ardennes, there was starlight. There was the reflection of the snow. There was faint moonlight filtering through the clouds. You didn't need to make more light. You just needed to take the tiny amount of light that was already there and amplify it. He was about to invent passive night vision in a foxhole with a soldering iron heated by a camp stove. Let's pause for a second to appreciate how insane this actually was. This is 1944. The transistor hasn't been invented yet. Electronics are bulky, fragile glass tubes that operate on high voltage. To build a light amplification device, you need a photocathode to catch the light photons. You need an electron multiplier to boost the signal. And you need a phosphor screen to turn those electrons back into a visible image. Today, we do this with microchips. Henderson was trying to do it with radio parts. He set up a workspace in a bombed-out cellar of a farmhouse near the front line. He draped blankets over the windows to block the light. For 3 days, he tinkered. His squad mates watched him with a mix of pity and confusion. "Jimmy's lost it," one of them whispered. "He's building a radio for his rifle. Maybe he's trying to call Berlin and ask them to surrender," another joked. Henderson ignored them. He took the telescopic lens from a broken pair of German binoculars he'd found. Zeiss glass, the best in the world. He used that as the objective lens to gather the light. Then came the hard part, the converter. He used the cathode ray tube from the P-51's radar set. But he had to modify it. He rewired the voltage inputs. He used the plane's step-up transformer to crank the voltage from a standard 6-volt Jeep battery up to a lethal 2,000 volts. This was the dangerous part. He was strapping a high-voltage electrical device next to his face. If the insulation failed, if the snow got into the wiring, if the capacitors discharged the wrong way, it wouldn't just blind him. It would fry his brain. He wrapped the entire assembly in black electrical tape, layer after layer. It looked ugly. It looked like a black, bulbous tumor growing out of the top of his M1 Garand. It was heavy. It was unbalanced. It hummed with a menacing electric buzz when he turned it on. But the question was, did it work? On the third night, Henderson emerged from the cellar. The storm had broken, but the clouds were still thick. It was another zero visibility night. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Harris, was waiting for him. "Henderson," Harris sighed, looking at the monstrosity taped to the corporal's rifle. "What in God's name is that?" "It's a sighting system, sir. It looks like a fire hazard. Does it even turn on?" Henderson didn't answer. He just gestured toward the tree line, 200 yards away. "Sir, stand behind me. Look over my shoulder." Harris rolled his eyes but stepped closer. Henderson flipped the toggle switch he had scavenged from the P-51's cockpit. There was a high-pitched whine as the capacitors charged. The vacuum tubes warmed up. A faint green glow emanated from the eyepiece. "Look through the tube, sir," Lieutenant Harris leaned in. He put his eye to the rubber cup Henderson had cut from a truck tire. Harris gasped. He actually recoiled, pulling his head back, then jammed it forward again to look. "My God," Harris whispered. Through the tube, the world wasn't black. It was a grainy, shimmering green, but it was visible. "I can see the trees," Harris said, his voice rising in disbelief. "I can see the individual branches. I can see—" Harris stopped. "There's a deer," he said softly. "By that stump. Must be 200 yards out. I can see its breath." Henderson nodded. "Passive amplification, sir. It takes the ambient light from the snow and boosts it about 500 times. No spotlight, no infrared beam. We can see them, but they can't see us." Harris pulled away from the scope and looked at Henderson with a new expression. It wasn't pity anymore. It was awe. "Corporal," Harris said, "how many batteries does this thing eat?" "A lot, sir, but I rigged a harness. I can carry 2 Jeep batteries in a backpack." Harris looked at the dark tree line, where the German patrols were undoubtedly moving into position. "Get your gear, Jimmy," Harris said. "We're going hunting." That night, the legend began. Henderson moved alone. He didn't want a spotter. A spotter couldn't see what he saw, anyway. He positioned himself near a crossroads that the Germans had been using to move supplies. He dug into the snow, wrapping the heavy batteries in wool blankets to keep them warm. He waited. The silence of the Ardennes was heavy. An hour passed. Then 2. Then, the scope flickered. Green shapes, moving against the static. A patrol. 12 men. They were walking confidently. Why wouldn't they? It was pitch black. They were invisible. Through the crude, tape-wrapped scope, Henderson watched them. He could see the steam rising from their mouths. He could see the officer at the front, checking his compass. He could see the details of their uniforms. They were totally unaware. Henderson settled the crosshairs on the officer's chest. The scope hummed its electric song. Henderson breathed out. The vapor vanished into the dark. He squeezed the trigger. Crack. The officer dropped. The rest of the German patrol froze. They didn't take cover immediately because they couldn't process what had happened. There was no muzzle flash. The sound echoed off the trees, so they couldn't locate the source. Where did that come from? You could imagine them screaming. Henderson cycled the bolt. Crack. The machine gunner fell. Now the panic set in. The Germans started firing blindly into the woods, spraying bullets at nothing. Henderson didn't flinch. He just tracked them. Green ghosts running in a green world, one by one. He didn't shoot to wound. He shot to kill. He moved positions after every third shot, dragging the heavy batteries through the snow. He was a phantom. By the time the shooting stopped, 9 Germans lay dead in the snow. The remaining 3 had fled back to their lines, screaming about spirits in the woods. Henderson walked down to the road. He collected the officer's papers. He checked the bodies. Then he disappeared back into the darkness. When the German survivors reported back to their HQ, their commander didn't believe them. "Snipers don't work at night," the Obersturmführer insisted. It was a luck shot, a stray bullet. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that, patrols vanished. Sentries were found shot through the head with surgical precision in total darkness. Radio intercepts started picking up a new phrase. "Achtung, der Nachtgeist." Watch out for the night ghost. The Germans were terrified. But they were also smart. They realized this wasn't just luck. This was a system. And if there is one thing the German military machine was good at, it was adapting. They stopped sending regular infantry patrols. They realized that to kill a ghost, you don't send a soldier. You send a monster. High Command in Berlin authorized the deployment of a specialized unit to the sector. The Jäger Sonderkommando. Hunter Special Command. These weren't conscripts. These were the elite, veteran counter-snipers from the Eastern Front, and they brought their own toys. Henderson was back at the farmhouse, recharging his batteries, when Lieutenant Harris walked in. He looked grim. "Jimmy," Harris said, Intel says the Germans are moving a new unit into the valley across from us. SS boys. Snipers. Henderson looked up from his workbench. He was soldering a loose connection on the scope. Let them come, Henderson said. They know you're out there, Harris warned. They're coming specifically for you, Henderson smiled. It was a cold, tight smile. Good, he said. That means I don't have to go looking for them. But Jimmy Henderson didn't know what was waiting for him. He had built a technological marvel. He had ruled the night for 2 weeks, but the batteries were getting old. The vacuum tubes were starting to dim, and the enemy he was about to face wasn't just walking blindly into the dark. The hunter was about to become the hunted. To understand the duel that was about to happen in the frozen forests of Belgium, we have to talk about the technology of 1944. Because while Jimmy Henderson was taping airplane parts to a hunting rifle, the German war machine had actually developed an official solution to the darkness. It was codenamed Vampire, the Zielgerät 1229. It was the world's first military-grade night vision rifle scope. It was issued to the elite Panzer Grenadiers, and on paper, it was terrifying. It looked like something out of a science fiction movie. A massive 35-pound backpack battery, a huge infrared spotlight mounted on top of an Sturmgewehr 44 assault rifle. The Germans were proud of the Vampire. They believed it was invincible. But the Vampire had the same fatal flaw as the American sniper scope. It was an active system. It worked by blasting out a beam of infrared light. Think of it like walking through a dark room holding a flashlight. Yes, you can see where you are going, but everyone else in the room can see the flashlight beam, even if they can't see you. Jimmy Henderson's device was different. It was passive. It didn't project anything. It didn't emit a signal. It sat in the darkness, silent and cold, simply drinking in the existing light from the stars and the snow. In a dark room, Jimmy wasn't holding a flashlight. He was just the guy with the wide-open eyes. When the German Jaeger Sonderkommando unit deployed into the Ardennes on January 3, 1945, they brought their Vampire scopes. They felt like predators. They set up ambushes along the ridge lines, sweeping their infrared spotlights back and forth, looking for Americans. To the naked eye of the average GI, the woods looked pitch black. But to Jimmy Henderson, he was sitting 400 yards away, looking through his glowing green tube. And to him, the German forest didn't look black. It looked like a laser light show. Every time a German soldier turned on his Vampire scope, Henderson saw a massive, blinding beam of light cutting through the trees. It was like shooting at lighthouses, Henderson would later tell his brother in a letter that was heavily censored by the army. They thought they were invisible, but they were waving giant flags at me. The hunter became the prey instantly. The first engagement with the Vampire unit lasted 30 seconds. Henderson saw 3 beams of infrared light sweeping a valley floor. He realized immediately what they were. He adjusted his position, settling into the frozen mud behind a fallen oak tree. He waited until the 3 beams crossed, the German snipers coordinating their search. He took the one on the left first. Crack! The infrared beam jerked upward into the sky as the German gunner fell backward, his finger still clenching the trigger, sending a stream of bullets into the clouds. The other 2 Germans panicked. They swung their infrared spotlights wildly, trying to find the shooter. But they were looking for a muzzle flash. They were looking for an infrared signature. They found neither. Henderson cycled the bolt. The cold steel stuck to his mittens. Crack. The second light went out. The third German realized the trap. He shut off his scope. He went dark, trying to hide. Smart move. But too late. Henderson had already memorized his position. He saw the heat signature of the man's breath against the cold tree bark. Crack. Silence returned to the valley. Henderson lay there for 10 minutes, not moving a muscle. His heart was hammering against his ribs. The electric hum of his scope was the only sound in the world. He had just dismantled a squad of the Third Reich's most advanced night fighters, and he had done it with literal garbage. But victory makes you careless, and the Germans were about to change the rules of the game again. We need to address the forbidden part of Henderson's hack. When we say he built this out of radio parts, It sounds quaint. It sounds like a MacGyver episode. But there is a reason the Army didn't build scopes this way. The cathode ray tube, Henderson ripped out of that P-51 Mustang, was designed to sit in a dashboard, 3 feet away from the pilot's face. It was shielded by a metal casing. Henderson had stripped away the shielding to save weight. He had strapped the bare glass tube directly to the stock of his rifle, which meant that every time he pressed his cheek against the stock to aim, his right eye was about 2 inches away from a high-voltage vacuum tube emitting soft X-rays. He was literally irradiating his own head. Henderson knew this. He was a mechanic. He knew that when you overvolt a cathode tube to increase brightness, which he had done, you increase the radiation output. But he didn't care. Or maybe he just decided that a slow death from radiation in 20 years was better than a quick death from a German bayonet tonight. By the second week of January, the physical toll was mounting. The headache started first, sharp, blinding migraines that struck him right behind the eyes after a few hours of using the scope. Then came the burns. The step-up transformer he used to generate the 2,000 volts needed for the tube wasn't insulated properly. In the damp snow of the Ardennes, the electricity would arc. Every few shots, a spark would jump from the wiring and shock Henderson's cheek. Small, jagged burns began to dot his face. He smelled like ozone and singed hair. He looked like a monster. His fellow soldiers started giving him a wide berth. It wasn't just the weird equipment anymore. It was Jimmy himself. He was becoming part of the machine. He stopped sleeping during the day. He would just sit in the bunker, staring at the wall. His eyes dilated and red. "You need to rest, Jimmy," his lieutenant told him. "You're burning out." "I can't," Henderson rasped. "If I'm not out there, who watches the road?" He was addicted to the green world. He was addicted to the power of seeing the unseen. And the Germans fed that addiction, because after the failure of the Vampire unit, they stopped sending technology. They started sending messages. On January 12th, a patrol found a dead American GI near the perimeter. Pinned to his chest was a note written in English. It read, "We know you are watching. The ghost will bleed." It was psychological warfare. They wanted him to know they were hunting him specifically. Henderson took the note. He folded it and put it in his pocket. "They're getting desperate," he said. But he was wrong. They weren't desperate. They were patient. They had realized that Henderson had a pattern. He liked the high ground. He liked the ridge lines where the starlight was strongest. So the Germans set a trap designed specifically for a man who relied on light amplification. January 15. The Battle of the Bulge is nearing its end. But the fighting is fiercest in the pockets of resistance. Henderson is positioned on a hill overlooking a rail yard near the town of Foy. The rail yard is a graveyard of twisted metal, bombed-out trains, overturned boxcars, a perfect maze for infantry. Intel reported that a German officer carrying maps of the retreat would be moving through the yard at 300 hours. Henderson's job was to stop him. He set up his rig. The batteries were heavy on his back, digging into his frostbitten shoulders. He flipped the switch. The green glow washed over his vision. The rail yard looked like a ghostly underwater city. He scanned the tracks. Movement. 3 figures moving between the boxcars. Henderson steadied his breathing. He focused on the middle figure. He was about to squeeze the trigger when his instincts screamed. Something was wrong. The figures were moving too openly. They weren't hugging the shadows. They were walking down the center of the track. It was bait. Before Henderson could lower his rifle, a thump echoed from the German lines. A mortar shell. But it wasn't an explosive. It burst overhead, 500 feet in the air. A magnesium flare. Now, to a normal soldier, a flare is annoying. It turns night into day. It ruins your night vision. But to Jimmy Henderson, looking through a light amplification device that boosted ambient light by 500 times, a magnesium flare was a nuclear bomb. The sudden, blinding intensity of the burning magnesium hit the objective lens of his scope. The system didn't have auto-gating technology like modern night vision. It didn't have a safety shutoff. The tube amplified the flare's light instantly. The eyepiece exploded with white light. Henderson screamed. He threw the rifle into the snow and clawed at his face. It was like staring directly into the sun through a telescope. For a moment, he was totally blind. And that's when the shooting started. The Germans knew exactly where he was. They had calculated that the sniper would be on the ridge. They used the flare to blind him. And now they were suppressing the hill with MG-42 fire. Bullets chewed up the ground around him. "Jimmy!" It was Lieutenant Harris, crawling up the ridge behind him. "Jimmy! Move!" Henderson was rolling in the snow, his hands over his eyes. "I can't see," he yelled. "They burned the tube." He wasn't worried about his eyes. He was worried about the scope. He dragged the rifle toward him. He peered through the eyepiece with his left eye, his non-shooting eye. The green image was gone. In its place was a black burn mark in the center of the screen, surrounded by static. The phosphor screen had been scorched by the intensity of the light. The device was dead. The Germans were advancing up the hill. He could hear their shouting. Henderson was blind again, just like everyone else. He fumbled for his wire cutters. "What are you doing?" Harris screamed, firing his Thompson submachine gun blindly into the dark. "Bypassing," Henderson grunted. He ripped the tape off the assembly. He exposed the raw wiring of the voltage regulator. He needed to overdrive the tube. He needed to push enough voltage through it to force the electrons around the burn mark. It was a suicide move. If he pushed too much power, the glass tube would shatter in his face. "Cover me," Henderson yelled. He twisted the potentiometer on the power supply. 1,000 volts. Nothing. 1,500. Static. He cranked it to maximum. 2,500 volts. The wires began to smoke. The ozone smell was overpowering. The tube hummed a euro, a high-pitched shriek that sounded like it was in pain. And then, a flicker. The image came back. It was distorted. It was warped. The edges were bleeding with electrical interference. But the center? The center was bright, angry neon green. He had overcharged the system so hard he was practically seeing the souls of the trees. Henderson shouldered the rifle. The first German soldier was 40 yards away, climbing over the ridge. To Henderson, the soldier looked like a glowing demon. Crack. The German fell. Henderson swung the heavy, smoking rifle to the left. 2 more. Crack. Crack. The physics of what he was doing were impossible. The tube should have melted. The filaments should have snapped, but it held. For 3 minutes, Jimmy Henderson held that ridge with a weapon that was literally melting in his hands. He fired until the receiver of his Garand was hot enough to blister skin. He fired until the heavy lead-acid batteries in his backpack finally died, draining the last drop of chemical energy into the dying tube. The green light faded to black. Silence returned to the hill. Lieutenant Harris crawled over to him. "Jimmy?" Henderson was lying on his back, staring up at the real stars, which looked dim and pathetic compared to the artificial sun he had just been looking at. "It's done, sir," Henderson whispered. "The ghost is dead." He tapped the side of the scope. The glass was cracked. The wiring was fused together. The prototype was destroyed. But the Germans on the slope weren't moving. We have the official American after-action reports for that night. They are dry. They talk about repelling an enemy advance. But history is often better written by the losers. Decades later, a diary was found in the archives of a German soldier named Hans Weber. He was part of the unit that attacked that ridge. He survived because he stayed at the bottom of the hill. Here is what he wrote about that night. "We had them. We knew the sniper was blind. We saw the flare hit him. We moved up to finish it. But then, the forest woke up again. The shots were too fast. Too perfect. It was not a man shooting at us. It was the machine itself. I saw the muzzle flash from the ridge. But it wasn't orange fire. It was green static. The Americans have made a pact with the devil. They have stolen the eyes of the wolf." Weber surrendered the next morning. When interrogated, he refused to speak about tanks or artillery. He only asked one question. The ghost, did he survive? Because to the Germans, Henderson wasn't a corporal anymore. He was a technological terror, but back at the American camp, the terror was just a 24-year-old kid with burn marks on his face and a pile of broken radio parts on his bunk. Henderson tried to rebuild the scope the next day. But the specialized radar tube from the P-51 was unique. There wasn't another crash site to scavenge. He went back to fighting the war the old-fashioned way, with iron sights and fear. But the genie was out of the bottle. Word of what Henderson had done traveled up the chain of command. It bypassed the captains and the majors. It went straight to Ordnance R&D. 2 weeks later, a jeep pulled up to Henderson's foxhole. 2 men in clean uniforms stepped out. They weren't infantry. They were from the Signal Corps labs in Fort Monmouth. "Corporal Henderson?" one of them asked. Jimmy looked up, cleaning his standard M1. "Yes, sir. We heard you did some unauthorized modifications to government property." Jimmy thought he was going to be court-martialed. He stood up, ready to accept his fate. "I did what I had to do, sir." The officer smiled. He reached into the jeep and pulled out a metal case. "We're not here to arrest you, son. We're here to learn." He opened the case. Inside was a prototype. It looked cleaner than Henderson's. The wires were insulated. The battery was smaller, but the design, the passive amplification concept, it was identical. "We've been trying to make this work in a lab for 2 years, the officer said. "We couldn't figure out the voltage regulation for the portable power supply." "How did you do it?" Henderson looked at the officers. Then he looked at his pile of scrap metal. "I didn't use a regulator, sir. I used the starter solenoid from a jeep and a piece of tin foil." The scientists stared at him. It was the moment asymmetric warfare changed forever. The moment the military realized that innovation doesn't always come from a whiteboard. Sometimes it comes from a desperate man with a pair of wire cutters and a refusal to die in the dark. Jimmy Henderson survived the war. He went back to Montana. He went back to the farm. He never talked about the night ghost to his neighbors. He never bragged about the 37 German patrols. In fact, he never went hunting again. "It's not sport," he told his brother once, years later. "When you can see them, and they can't see you. It's not hunting. It's just erasing." But while Jimmy tried to forget, the military remembered. The Henderson modification, as it was quietly referred to in ordnance documents, became the foundation for the next generation of night vision. The scientists took his crude, tape-wrapped concept, passive light amplification, and refined it. They replaced the dangerous, high-voltage vacuum tubes with smaller, safer image intensifiers. They replaced the scavenged lenses with precision optics. By the time the Vietnam War started, the technology had matured into the AN/PVS-2 Starlight scope. It didn't need an infrared spotlight. It didn't need a backpack battery. It was a self-contained unit that mounted on an M16 rifle. It turned the jungles of Vietnam green, just like Henderson had turned the forests of the Ardennes green 20 years earlier. But here is the fascinating technical connection. If you open up a modern Generation 3 night vision monocular, the kind Navy SEALs use today, and you strip away the digital microprocessors and the auto-gating safety features, at its core, the physics are exactly the same. Photons enter the front. They hit a photocathode. They are converted into electrons. The electrons are amplified. They hit a phosphor screen. The heart of a $4,000 military panoramic night vision goggle is still, essentially, the same mechanism that a farm boy built with $12 of junk in a frozen basement in 1944. He didn't just build a gadget. He discovered a fundamental truth about warfare. He proved that superior technology doesn't always beat superior ingenuity. The Germans had the vampire. They had the funding. They had the PhDs. But they lost the night because they were trying to conquer the darkness with brute force. They were trying to shine a light into the void. Henderson won because he respected the darkness. He didn't try to change it. He just found a way to live inside it. There is a final layer to this story that we need to discuss. The psychological one. War has rules. Not written rules, but understood ones. If I shoot at you, you shoot at me. We take cover. We flank. It is a contest of skill and courage. But night vision breaks that contract. It creates a God complex. When you are the only one who can see, You cease to be a soldier fighting another soldier. You become an exterminator. Henderson felt this. That's why he stopped hunting. He realized that stripping the enemy of their ability to even perceive the threat wasn't just a tactical advantage. It was a terrifying moral threshold. In his letters, which were released by his family in 2011, he wrote about the green faces. "I still see them," he wrote, "not in my nightmares, but when I close my eyes. They are always green, glowing, grainy green. They look like ghosts before they even die. I turned men into ghosts while they were still breathing." This is the burden of asymmetric technology. Today, we fight wars with drones piloted from shipping containers in Nevada. We drop missiles on targets that never hear us coming. We have institutionalized the night ghost. We have built an entire military doctrine around the idea that the enemy should never, ever see us. And it started in the Ardennes. It started because a 24-year-old kid didn't want his friends to die in the dark. So he stole the fire from the gods, or in this case, the cathode tube from a P-51, and he lit up the world. Jimmy Henderson died in 1998. At his funeral, there were no military honors. No 21-gun salute. Just his family and a few old friends from the VFW. But legend has it that a week after the funeral, a package arrived at the farmhouse. There was no return address. Inside was a small, black box. When his son opened it, he found an antique piece of glass. It was scorched in the center, a black burn mark surrounded by a faint, yellowed phosphor coating. It was the original screen, the one that had burned out on the ridge near Foy. There was a note inside. It wasn't from the U.S. Army. It was written in German. "For the night ghost, a worthy opponent. For the night ghost, a worthy adversary." Whether the package was real or just another part of the myth, we'll never know. But what we do know is this. In the winter of 1944, the Ardennes Forest swallowed an entire army. It was a place where light went to die. But for 3 weeks, in the deepest, darkest part of that winter, there was a spark, a green, electric spark. It was the spark of human defiance. The proof that no matter how dark the world gets, if you have a screwdriver, some electrical tape, and enough courage, you can always find a way to see. This story of Jimmy Henderson is just one example of black project engineering, where soldiers in the field modify their gear in ways that technically break the rules, but ultimately win the war. But there is another story, a story about a Marine sniper in Vietnam who did something even crazier. He didn't modify his scope, he modified the bullets. He turned a standard Remington 700 into an anti-material weapon capable of stopping a truck engine from a mile away. And just like Henderson, the Pentagon tried to ban it, until they realized they needed it. If you want to hear the story of the White Feather's magic bullet, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of military tech, do me a favor, click that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because history is full of ghosts, and we are going to find them all. I'll see you in the next one.